I arrived in rural Ohio in the last days of October in the year 1989, and the moment my boots touched the ground, I felt as if something had already sealed the land around us long before our helicopter disappeared into the gray sky, and the wind carried a stillness that did not belong to any forest this time of year. My team spread into a loose formation along the narrow service road that cut toward the fenced compound, and even before we reached the gate, I felt the shape of absence pressing against my ribs. Federal sites do not go quiet without giving signs, yet this place waited like a held breath. The first gate hung open with a lock resting uselessly against the metal, as if the guard stepped away for only a moment and never returned. Inside the checkpoint shack, a half-filled logbook lay across the desk with ink still dark and wet, and the chair pushed back so hard it scraped the floor in a crooked streak. The details told me people left quickly, but not from a fight and not from anything normal. Under my gear, a faint pressure grew behind my molars, steady and slow like a vibration deep in the earth. I kept telling myself to focus as we crossed the yard scattered with fallen folders and broken pens, and a badge reel still clipped to a torn scrap of shirt. No bodies, no bull. At casings, no signs of panic in motion, yet everything looked abandoned mid-breath. I held my rifle close and swept the entrance hall, where a coffee mug waited half full beside a ringing phone left off the receiver. The young lieutenant walked at my shoulder, glancing at the lights that flickered one shade too late each time they brightened. I told him to breathe steady and stay sharp, though I knew he had never walked into a facility held in total silence. Silence carries more threat than noise ever will. We cleared the first wing slow and careful. The medic checked his watch and frowned because the minutes shifted each time he looked, and he insisted the battery was dying, but I knew the strangeness belonged to the building. The pressure behind my teeth rose and faded in patterns that did not fit any machine hum. We moved deeper into the corridor where a lab coat lay crumpled, and when I nudged it aside with my boot, I found a thin smear of blood that trailed only a few inches before stopping, as if someone had been pulled upward clean out of the world. I kept the thought to myself, men sense more from your tone than your words. In a small office, we found the first body, a middle-aged technician still gripping a service pistol with a wound angled wrong, as if he fought himself in his final moment. Torn papers covered the desk as if ripped by hands working in panic. The lieutenant whispered notes for the record. I shut the door and marked it with chalk. Our radio man searched the phone lines, but every attempt returned only dry static. Our own radios echoed with a soft rhythmic pulse that did not match any known interference. It felt like breath sliding through the wires. At the stairwell, I touched the rail and jerked my hand back because heat throbbed through the metal in small beats not tied to any generator. I hid the reaction and signaled the descent into sub-level 1. The air thickened as we moved down. A sour mix of bleach and damp soil drifted from the vents, and the lights flickered in odd rhythms that made shadows feel slow to follow our steps. In the first room, a recording reel spun, though the tape had reached its end, and the soft tapping of loose film filled the quiet. On the desk, a transcript described interviews with a civilian subject who dreamed of a deep sound beneath the earth and woke with fear he could not explain. Nothing violent yet, the writing carried a shaken edge. In another room, we found a young assistant lying beneath a desk, eyes open, face calm, without a mark on him. The medic checked his pulse, then shook his head. No gas, no heat, no explanation. Small changes began to bother me. A chair shifted from where I remembered it. A cabinet hung slightly open after I had closed it. Each detail trivial but heavy when placed beside the pulse running through the walls. At the far end of the corridor, a locked research wing awaited us, but our access code slid through without resistance, and the electric lock clicked open even before I finished entering the final digit, as if the building expected our arrival. Inside were rows of acoustic equipment and notebooks filled with wave sketches and interview notes marked with stamps from agencies above our clearance. Some pages referenced field tests in nearby towns. Each note sharpened the knot in my chest. This project had reached further than we had been told. A monitor on the back wall flickered through empty hallways, each frozen frame showing tiny differences that did not belong to recorded images. A chair in a new position, a door standing open when it had been closed, A sleeve lifted as if someone had passed through the frame. I touched the screen and the pulse between my fingers matched the pressure in my teeth. My men waited behind me, silent, trusting. I told them we would move deeper and find the generators because answers hide near power sources. As we approached the next stairwell, the very air seemed to brace. The passage felt narrower than the one above, as if the concrete had drawn inward. Halfway down, the point man leaned to the wall and said he heard someone speaking behind the concrete, yet no ducts or vents existed there. I ordered him onward. At the bottom, the smell of soil and bleach thickened, and the lights dimmed in uneven bursts. And each time they dipped, I felt the world pause for a heartbeat before releasing us again. And I knew then the building was not empty, and whatever had emptied it had not left. We moved through the first corridor of the lower level with our breaths held tight, because every step felt slightly disconnected from the one before it, as if some unseen force nudged us forward in broken skips of time, and the dim lights overhead shifted between long blinks that left my vision uncertain of where I had just stood. The padded rooms here were meant for acoustic tests, and each one held racks of equipment frozen mid-task with their needles stuck at angles that made no technical sense. In the far corner of the first chamber lay a technician with both hands clamped hard over his ears, as if trying to block out something none of us could hear. His expression did not show fear or pain, but something stranger, a quiet resignation mixed with confusion, as though he understood the end was coming long before it reached him. Our medic stepped beside him and wiped sweat from his brow, though the room felt cold. He checked the man and shook his head. On the floor beside the corpse lay a notebook filled with uneven numbers repeating in no pattern, and each group of digits looked less like measurements and more like the scattered remains of a mind pressed too far. The medic whispered that he felt pressure behind his eyes and blamed lack of sleep, while I blamed the building that seemed to breathe around us. We reached a pair of reinforced doors marked with restricted clearance. Our codes should have required multiple attempts, but the lock disengaged the instant we approached, as if waiting for us. The lieutenant looked at me with a tightening jaw, but said nothing. Beyond the doors stretched a wide room lined with monitors that displayed frozen images from every hallway in the facility. None of the timestamps aligned. Some showed hours that had never existed. Others stuttered between impossible sequences, as though time itself had grown uncertain inside these concrete walls. When I tapped the controls, the screens refused to change. In one frame, I saw the corridor behind us. A thin, wavering silhouette slid across the lens, then vanished in less than a second. When I looked again, the hall stood empty. A binder on a nearby table carried the project name, and inside it the pages described low-frequency field tests in nearby towns where subjects experienced altered behavior patterns after exposure. The notes suggested that the signal returned something unexpected, not feedback, not distortion, but a kind of echo that did not belong to any known source. The lieutenant read until his face paled, and the radio man tried again to reach command. The headset crackled with the slow pulse that haunted every corner of this place. Then a faint voice crawled through the static. The words came broken, but the cadence resembled the lieutenant giving orders even though he stood beside me. When the radio man met his eyes, the blood drained from his face. I seized the handset, but the line dropped into silence. We regrouped at the central hallway that led deeper toward the generator sectors. I counted my men out of habit 7 besides me each, with the same hollow focus of soldiers trying to anchor themselves inside a place that did not want to let them think clearly. The pressure behind my molars tightened in waves that matched our footsteps. The corridor ahead felt subtly altered from the map I had memorized. Corners shifted inward. Doors stood closer than they should. Distance felt untrustworthy. Inside a diagnostics lab, we found sketches of wave patterns drawn in frantic strokes. The notes mentioned echoes from unknown sources riding the signal like stowaways. The final page held a single shaking line that read, "It is already inside." No explanation followed. Across the room, the medic found a recording booth. The tape had run out, but when he rewound it, the monitor flickered and showed a man sitting in the booth. The man had my build, my haircut, my posture. When he played the tape again, the booth sat empty. Neither of us spoke. I felt the weight settle cold in my chest. The lieutenant tried to recover control, insisting we continue toward the lower floors and retrieve the data listed in our brief, though each word sounded thinner than before. The mission already felt wrong, as if someone above us had traded the lives in this facility for the research they wanted. At the final stairwell, warm air drifted upward, though the generators lay far below. When I touched the wall, the vibration crept through my fingers into my jaw, not mechanical, not natural, more like the slow pulse of something aware. I met the eyes of my men and saw the same unspoken truth. The building held us in its grasp. We descended the narrow stairwell, where each step sent a faint tremor through the metal mesh beneath our boots, as if something far under the foundation stirred in response to our weight. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched through a low-hanging mist that did not smell like smoke or steam. My breath left my mouth in visible clouds, though the air felt strangely warm. Storage racks lined the passage. Across the dusty floor, a set of footprints appeared. Bare feet, adult-sized, walking toward a closed door with no returning prints. I pressed my palm against the metal, cold, silent. I opened it slow. The room beyond held only a gently rolling wrench and no vents or windows that could hide a person. We had just missed something. The lieutenant watched me for direction. I signaled deeper into the service halls. The turns grew sharper than any architectural plan should allow, and the lights blinked in frantic rhythms that made the walls throb with distorted depth. When the lights dipped, everything tightened around us like the building exhaled reality for a heartbeat. We continued until the hallway opened toward the main lab suites, where a thin copper wire stretched across the floor. The radio man pointed it out. I crouched and traced it to a panel. The demo man uncovered a pressure switch beneath a loose tile and a claymore aimed outward, ready to keep intruders from descending further. He disarmed it with steady hands despite the tremor in his breath. Beyond the trap, the static thickened in irregular bursts that prickled across my skin even without my headset. The corridor led to a large viewing window where a faint child-sized handprint marked the glass. In the center of the testing bay, a perfect clean circle cut through the dust as if someone stood there waiting. I felt the pressure behind my eyes hard enough that my vision blurred for a moment. We pressed on until we reached the steel door of the main lab suite. The keypad flickered with half-lit symbols, and when I entered the code, it erased itself, then unlocked without confirmation. The door slid open into a vast room lined with analog machines and tape reels and scattered desks left mid-task. A lone reel twitched a slow fraction of a turn, though no power reached the machine, and the scraping sound echoed through the chamber like a whispered warning. The medic swore he felt the floor dip. I felt it too, a slow inhalation from somewhere beneath. I regrouped the men and prepared to advance toward the signal core, where whatever destroyed this place waited for us in the hum running through the walls. The moment the door to the inner lab slid shut behind us, the light along the ceiling shuddered in a single long flicker that made the walls seem to pull inward before settling again, and as the brightness returned, I felt a faint misalignment in my steps, as though the space around us had shifted in ways my eyes could not trace. Near the next junction, the radio man stopped so suddenly the point man nearly collided with him. He pointed to a thin copper wire stretched low across the floor, almost invisible beneath the dust. I crouched and followed it to a loose panel where the demo man uncovered a hidden pressure switch rigged to a claymore facing outward, ready to maim anyone who dared come down this far. He worked in silence, his movements slow and controlled, though his hands trembled with that particular fatigue born not from fear, but from the knowledge that danger had been placed with intention by someone who did not want us reaching the deeper levels. When the trap was disarmed, we advanced into a corridor thick with a static pulse that pressed into the air like a slow, irregular heartbeat. Even without my headset, I heard it inside my skull in uneven bursts that made my temples throb. Halfway down the hall, a large viewing window revealed a testing bay coated in undisturbed dust except for a single cleared circle in the center. A faint child-sized handprint marked the inside of the glass. No footprints, no tools, no drag marks. Just a perfect circle, as if someone or something had stood there and waited. I scanned every vent and corner, but the bay held nothing. We continued until we reached a steel door with half-lit numbers stuttering across its keypad. I entered the code, and the panel cleared itself before unlocking without the usual mechanical sound, as if the door had chosen to open rather than been forced. Inside the main lab suite, rows of analog machines and tangled lines of tape filled the room like a vast abandoned archive of frantic work. A reel near the center twitched by a fraction of a turn, though it was unplugged from any power source, and the thin scraping of metal against metal echoed across the chamber like a faint gasp. Every man froze. I checked the cord, then the outlet, then the switch. Nothing held life, yet the reel made one last slow turn before settling. The medic whispered that he felt the floor give a tiny breath beneath us. I felt it too, a soft downward shift like something massive had exhaled far below the concrete. We regrouped and moved toward the inner core door labeled Signal Room. The first attempt to unlock it failed, but on the second try, the air shifted as though pressure inside the room adjusted for our arrival. Then the door slid aside without resistance. The room beyond was small, lined with machines that fed into a towering central console. A notebook lay open across a stool, its pages filled with uneven handwriting that grew worse as the entries neared the blackout night. One page mentioned echoes returning on the carrier wave. Another referenced impulses that did not match any test pattern. The last legible line read it came back wrong. I felt the weight of the words settle into the space behind my ribs. The lieutenant hovered over my shoulder and asked if the notes explained what happened. I told him they gave fragments, nothing more, and as I spoke, I felt the sensation of being watched not by a person, but by something coiled inside the waveform itself. The console flickered with faint power, though the generators had not been fully restored. The frozen waveform on the central screen held a single sharp peak that pulsed like a heartbeat. The medic touched the screen and jerked back, saying he felt a vibration under the glass, not from electricity, but from something aware. A sudden clatter sounded from the hallway, and the point man spun to cover it. A metal tool rolled toward us, stopping at my boot. No footsteps, no breath, no shape. The mist on the ground drifted as if nudged by someone unseen. I motioned us forward because standing still made the building feel like it pressed against our minds, demanding entry. We followed the corridor toward the tape vault and server chamber. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as a muffled explosion rolled through the walls. The shock made the machine gunner stagger. A second claymore deeper in the halls had detonated. Alarms flickered red for a moment, then faded into silence. Smoke sealed off our path back. The radio operator lay on the ground with a shard of metal driven through his vest. No pulse. The medic covered his face with a gloved hand. The grief ran silent, the way it always does in places where survival demands stillness. We gathered ourselves because there was no extraction path left and no contact with command. The lieutenant insisted the mission remained intact: retrieve the data, restore control, secure the site, but each word felt hollow in the heavy air. I looked down the dim hall, stretching like a tunnel with no end. The tremor beneath the floor pulsed again, slow, deliberate, as though the building drew us deeper. The men waited for my lead. I told them we would move on. The air thickened as we advanced. Every breath dragged like it passed through warm cloth. The young private walked at the rear, gripping his rifle so tight his knuckles blanched. He tried to hide the trembling, but I saw the small drift in his aim. The hallway widened into a long corridor lined with numbered doors, though the flickering lights made the numbers blur and warp at the edges. I checked several rooms and found testing booths empty of equipment, except for scattered pages filled with irregular wave drawings that resembled heart monitors skipping in unnatural beats. The point man signaled us toward a small control office where an active field phone buzzed softly with a live signal. I hesitated, then lifted the receiver. A faint hum filled the line before a voice spoke my first name in a calm, steady tone and recited details of my service record no one outside my team should know. It told me to recover the red tag tapes and avoid shutting the system down. When I asked about the nearby towns, the line fell silent, then returned with a single phrase: containment underway. I hung up without telling the men. Fear was already anchored in their breaths. We advanced to the next junction when dust rained from above in a fine line. We froze. Something moved in the ceiling with a slow, heavy drag. The medic whispered that the pressure behind his eyes had returned sharper than before. I steadied him with a nod and pushed forward because whatever waited ahead had already decided we would reach it. The tape vault door finally appeared, twisted outward as if something inside had forced its way into the hall, and as we stepped through into the vast chamber lined with shelves and scattered red-tagged reels, I felt the building tighten around us like a closing hand. The vault swallowed us in a stillness so heavy it felt like the air itself resisted each breath, and the shelves stretched wider than expected, lined with endless rows of tapes, cabinets, and metal cases, each coated in a thin, settled dust that clung to every surface except the long strip where several red tag reels lay pulled, scattered, or broken, as though someone had searched through them in frantic desperation. The first body sat slumped near the far corner, a technician whose blistered hands told a story of someone who had tried to rip live cables from a socket long after reason had left him. His eyes stared upward into the vent overhead as if he died listening to something crawling through the metal. The medic knelt beside him, checked for formality, then stepped back, shaking his head and rubbing his temple like the pressure behind his eyes had returned stronger than the floor above. The young private found a small folded note taped under a desk with coordinates written in unsteady handwriting, followed by the phrase already broadcasting the implication striking me harder than I showed. The coordinates marked the same nearby town mentioned earlier, and I felt my stomach tense at the thought of what might already be reaching them. The lieutenant looked at me with duty clashing against doubt in his eyes. He said the tapes must be recovered, that the mission demanded strict adherence. I told him those tapes were no longer safe to handle, that whatever had returned on the signal had corrupted everything inside this place. He pushed back, insisting the mission could not change. I told him it already had. The men around us wavered, split between his authority and the instinct pulling them toward my warning. A low hum slipped through the cabinets around us, threading itself into the room, as though the building wanted to listen. Something in the concrete beneath us shifted in one shallow pulse, like the structure itself breathed. I told the men plainly we needed to destroy the generators before we became part of whatever these researchers had awakened. The lieutenant stepped forward, anger tightening his stance, and one of the men loyal to him raised his rifle at me, though the anguish in his eyes made it clear he did not want to fire. The medic moved between us with his hands half raised, trying to stop a break before it began. I spoke directly to the man aiming at me, calmly reminding him that we all served the same mission and that orders meant nothing if the truth beneath them was sick. His breathing grew uneven. The lieutenant told him to steady himself, his voice cracking under the strain in the air. A faint echo of his command repeated a moment later in a mismatched tone that did not belong to him or any of us. The man with the rifle tightened his grip. The room seemed to lean closer. I took one slow step forward, letting my boot brush a broken reel on the floor, and the small scrape cut through the silence unnaturally loud. The medic flinched and whispered that he heard someone behind us, though no one stood there. A warmth slid across the walls like a living pulse, waiting for our next move. The lights flickered sharply, and for a moment complete darkness collapsed around us. In that brief void, I felt someone standing at my shoulder, close enough that their breath should have touched my cheek, though nothing stirred the air. When the light returned, the space behind me was empty. The point man swore under his breath. The young private raised his rifle to the doorway, trembling. The man aiming at me faltered for half a second, and the machine gunner pushed his weapon aside, ending the standoff before it shattered us. The lieutenant lunged forward as if to reclaim control, but his balance slipped, and I caught his arm to keep him from falling directly onto the scattered reels. He twisted, and we collided with a metal cabinet. The sharp corner struck his ribs, and he gasped, trying to recover footing. His hand slid along a panel edge, slick with dust, and he fell forward, striking his head against a steel shelf. His body dropped. The medic rushed to him, applying pressure to the wound, but the lieutenant's eyes drifted in small, unfocused motions. He tried to speak, but only shallow air escaped. I held his shoulder until his chest stopped rising. There was no anger in me for him, only the weight of watching a man driven too hard by orders that no longer belonged to the living. The soldier who had raised his rifle sank to his knees, whispering that he never meant for any of this. I told him fear did not make him a traitor, only human. The building pressed against my thoughts again like a slow hand shaping the edges of my awareness, and I forced the sensation away. With the lieutenant gone, the remaining men looked at me without hesitation. None argued the next course. The vault felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved inward. The mist on the floor thickened into slow drifting swirls. Shadows slid across the far walls, though nothing stood between us and the light. The point man said he heard his name whispered from the dark, though he walked alone at the front. The medic said he felt a heartbeat beneath the floor, matching the slow pulse behind his eyes. I laid a hand on the concrete and felt it too, a deep, uneven rhythm, like something inside the foundation waited for us to move. We left the vault, and the hallway outside had noticeably shortened the distance between the far junction and the door, no longer matching what we had walked moments before. The air carried the soil and bleach scent in a thicker wave. The lights flickered in elongated strokes that bent the edges of the walls so they seemed to tilt inward. We reached the next stairwell leading deeper into the generator sectors, and as we approached the steps, the pulse beneath the floor grew stronger, matching the rhythmic pressure in my teeth. The young private whispered that the shadows did not move right, and when I turned, I saw nothing, but sensed something listening, waiting. The medic tightened his pack and took a steady breath. I told the men we had one task left, and whatever waited below would not let us walk back out unless we silenced it at the source. We began the descent into the depths where the final shape of this nightmare waited, tied to the signal that had pulled every soul in this facility into its silent grip. The moment we stepped beyond the stairwell, the air thickened around us, as if the building itself recognized that our intentions had turned against it. And the corridor leading toward the generator galleries felt narrower than before, though nothing in the concrete had visibly changed. The men walked close behind me, shoulders tight, rifles, steady breaths shallow. The medic whispered that the pulse beneath the floor had deepened into something almost alive, and when I placed my boot on the next step, I felt the same slow push rising through the concrete into my legs like a heartbeat not human in origin. At the bottom, the doorway into the main gallery stood half open, leaking a warm glow that did not resemble any emergency lighting. It carried a strange breathing pattern, dimming and brightening in steady, uneven waves. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, and the heat rushed over us like exhaled air. The gallery stretched longer than the maps suggested, lined with rows of towering generators, their casings trembling with each pulse of the signal. Their indicator dials jerked in short, frantic motions, unable to track whatever rhythm had overtaken them. The mist along the floor thickened into swirling shapes that rolled and parted around our boots as if avoiding our steps. The medic pressed a hand to his chest and said it felt like standing next to an engine that was turning without sound. I felt the same heavy pressure in my sternum, like the structure of the room pressed into my lungs. The point man signaled toward an overturned chair near a service platform where a smear of dark fluid stretched a few inches before stopping, as if someone had been lifted straight off the ground. The medic crouched, touched the smear with a gloved fingertip, and pulled back, immediately saying it felt warm like living skin. We moved deeper, weaving between the generators. The young private stayed at my side, asking whether the lights seemed too bright at the edges, as though flickering faster than the eye could follow. I told him to stay focused, though the truth pressed at my own nerves. At the far wall, the warm glow from the panels intensified into a soft rise and fall that almost seemed to breathe with the room. I stepped closer and felt a faint tremor beneath the concrete that rose through my spine. The medic said the vibration matched the coordinates beat he had heard earlier in the static, and the thought tightened something cold around my ribs. This place was not just creating the signal, it was sending it outward. We reached the main cutoff switch, but the handle refused to move, as though something held it in place from inside the wall. The demo man examined it, shook his head, and stepped back. The point man suddenly inhaled sharp and said he saw something moving between the generators. We froze, weapons up, scanning the aisles. For a moment nothing moved except the slow rise and fall of light. Then the young private pointed toward the far end, whispering my name. A figure stood near the largest generator, its outline shaped like a person, yet still, in a way no living thing should be still. Its shoulders rose and fell in a rhythm that did not match breathing. The pale suggestion of a face turned toward us. The medic stepped forward before stopping himself. I raised my rifle. The figure shifted behind the machine, and when we reached the spot, nothing remained, not even a disturbance in the mist. I told the men to keep moving because fear in a place like this grew teeth the moment it was given space to linger. At the control station, hanging from a cracked panel, a lone red tag swayed in the warm currents. The metal beneath it bulged outward as though heated from inside by something desperate to escape. I touched it, and a vibration crawled through my fingers, matching the pulse behind my molars. I pulled my hand back and signaled the demo man to begin placing charges. He positioned the first explosive at a cable junction while the machine gunner set another along the base of the primary generator. Their movements were quick-trained, though their eyes darted constantly toward the dark aisles, as if expecting something to step out at any second. The medic kept watch, though he blinked often, his vision blurring in short, frustrating flickers. The young private covered the walkway above, but each time he heard a soft scrape behind him, he swung his rifle toward empty space. As the last charges were set, the hum under the floor deepened into a slow tidal pressure. The lights dimmed, stretching the shadows into long, jagged forms that crawled across the machinery. The gallery itself seemed to lean forward, as if the building braced against what we intended. When the demo man signaled that the final charge was armed, the medic whispered if we were certain this would end it. I told him nothing inside this place should be allowed to continue breathing. Destroying the generators was our only path forward. Even if the signal had already seeped into the world outside, we could still sever the source. A faint shudder ran through the floor. Something heavy shifted somewhere behind the walls, like a sleeper rolling beneath layers of stone. I felt the building tighten around us, squeezing the air from the room in slow, steady contractions. The young private stared at the far end of the gallery where the figure had appeared earlier and whispered that he still saw something moving in the mist. I told him not to focus on shapes, focus on the exit. The men pulled back toward the doorway, moving single file with the careful coordination of soldiers who understood exactly how close death walked behind them. As we reached the threshold, the pulse beneath the concrete surged, and for an instant the lights went dead, leaving only the warm glow of the panels and the rising sound of something deep beneath us awakening to the idea of its own end. When the power snapped back, I told the demo man to ready the detonator. The facility groaned around us in long, low vibrations that traveled up the walls. The machines throbbed harder, struggling against the chaos we had set into motion. The mist curled in frantic spirals around our feet. I met the eyes of each man and saw fear, but also resolved the steady acceptance that whatever hunted this place would not devour us without a fight. I told them we were done here. It was time to bring the building down before it decided to keep us. We formed a tight line near the exit doorway, our bodies tense, our breaths shallow, as though the air itself strained to hold us inside, and the young private whispered that he heard footsteps above us on the catwalk, even though the metal walkway stood empty in the flickering light. The medic clutched his pack close to his chest, trying to steady the tremor in his hands. The point man scanned the dark aisles, while the demo man gripped the detonator with his thumb resting over the trigger plate, waiting for my signal. Before we moved, I turned back for one last look at the gallery. The machines pulsed in long, dim swells that no longer resembled mechanical cycles, but felt more like a heartbeat growing aware of its own impending death. I felt its attention on us and told the men to stay close because the moment we left this room, the building would understand exactly what we intended. We moved into the stairwell fast, but controlled each step, echoing with a slow metallic note that reverberated inside the concrete walls. Halfway up, the young private jerked his head upward, saying he heard someone climbing above us, though the sound came from no surface my eyes could trace. The medic gripped the rail and whispered that the pressure behind his eyes had returned sharper, deeper, like something inside the air forced itself behind his skull. I told them to keep moving because hesitation in these walls felt like an invitation. The stairwell bent at the mid-landing, and as we turned, the machine gunner froze with his rifle raised. At the bottom of the stairs where we had just climbed, a figure stood motionless, its back turned facing the gallery below. Its shoulders rose and fell in a pattern too slow for human breathing. When it turned slightly, I saw a face not entirely mine, but close enough that my lungs tightened. Then the light flickered once, and the figure vanished, leaving only the mist rolling faintly along the steps. The young private swore under his breath, and the point man pulled him forward before fear rooted him in place. We continued up through the corridor that should have led us toward the exit route, but the walls around us pressed closer, the hallway narrowing, though the concrete showed no signs of movement. A metal door ahead slammed shut with force that sent dust raining from the ceiling. The medic tried the handle, but something held it firm from the other side, like a hand without a body pressed it closed. I redirected the team through a side passage that curved too sharply for any architectural plan we had seen. The air thinned with each step. A faint whisper drifted down the hall, not like a voice carried on air, but like a thought placed into the open, as though the building attempted to speak into our skulls rather than our ears. The whisper faded when I pushed us faster. Finally, the surface-level doorway came into view, a rectangle of cold darkness waiting at the end of a narrowing tunnel. The machine gunner checked the detonator again, his voice steady for the first time since the lower levels. He said the signal was strong enough to reach from here. I told him to wait until we reached the field. We burst through the exterior doors into the night air, which hit my face like a plunge into cold water, clearing the heavy pressure that had clung to us since descending into the sublevels. The ground felt real again, the stars overhead unwarped steady. The men breathed deeply as though each lungful fought to cleanse the residue of the building from their bodies. I counted heads. Every survivor stood present, though their eyes reflected the same hollow strain. We crossed the open yard quickly, our boots crunching against the dry soil. The young private kept glancing over his shoulder, whispering that the doorway behind us no longer looked dark, but felt like something waited just beyond the frame. The medic walked with one hand pressed to his temple, as though trying to keep something from bleeding into his thoughts. When we reached the field, I turned back once. The facility loomed against the trees, black, silent, and still yet somehow watching. I gave the order. The machine gunner pressed the detonator. A deep vibration rolled through the earth, a slow guttural thud followed by a collapsing rumble that dragged the entire structure downward, as if the ground itself swallowed the building. A faint glow rose from the rubble, then dimmed into nothing. The pulse in my teeth vanished in the same instant, leaving only a residual ache, like a warning too faint to decipher. We moved farther into the field, needing distance in case anything below tried to rise. The night held an unnatural stillness, no wind, no insects, no distant hum. The medic asked quietly if we had stopped the signal. I answered the only thing I could. We severed the source. Whether that ended everything remained uncertain. The young private pointed at the tree line where a shadow slipped between the branches, then disappeared. Fear made his voice crack, but I held him steady, telling him instinct was louder than sight in nights like this, and that not every movement meant a threat, but every movement deserved respect. A faint breeze drifted across the field, carrying the familiar blend of damp soil, and a sterile clean scent, the same unsettling mixture we had breathed inside the deepest rooms. The smell vanished as quickly as it came. Then a distant thump echoed from the far side of the valley, not from the collapsed structure, but from somewhere deeper underground, as though something shifted far beneath the earth. The medic stepped back, whispering whether we had woken something instead of killing it. I gave no answer because none felt honest. The extraction helicopter arrived moments later, emerging low above the tree line with steady, rhythmic lights free from distortion. As it landed, the crew chief waved us aboard, his eyes scanning us with unspoken questions he did not dare voice. When the rotors rose, the faintest suggestion of pressure returned behind my teeth and vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only its memory like a ghost brushing through bone. Inside the helicopter, the men slumped into their seats, exhausted beyond words. The medic held his pack tight, as though afraid letting go would invite something unseen to take his thoughts. The young private stared out the open door until the darkness swallowed the view of the ruins. The machine gunner sat rigid, eyes fixed on the floor as though waiting for it to shift beneath him again. As we flew toward Wright-Patterson, the night beneath us felt hollow and vast, a world darkened by what had escaped the fallen facility. When we landed near dawn, the cold air cut clean across my skin, and for the first time since entering that place, I felt something like clarity, though not peace. The men in unmarked suits waited for us at the pad, their faces unreadable, their silence colder than the morning air. They led us toward the debriefing building, and as the doors closed behind us, I realized the mission had not ended. It had only changed shape, and whatever truth waited ahead would not lift the weight settling deeper in my chest with every step. They separated us one by one in that silent building, and when my turn came, the room they placed me in felt too clean, too empty, too still, the kind of stillness that pressed against the skin rather than settled in the air. Two men in pale suits sat across from me, their faces unreadable, their voices calm in that rehearsed way that suggested decisions had been made long before any question left their mouths. They asked nothing about the dead or the missing or the collapse that shook the valley. They asked only whether any red tag tapes had survived and whether any of us had made physical contact with them. I told them the vault was already compromised when we arrived and that no one had touched the priority reels. They exchanged a glance, the kind of look men give when confirming their expectations, not adjusting them. They dismissed the others until I was the last one in the room. One man leaned forward and said quietly that Project Bell was closed forever and that no trace of the research would be allowed to continue. His tone held the certainty of an order spoken from far above him. I knew well enough to hear the lie inside his truth. If the project had ended, they would not have been so desperate to recover its remnants. They moved me to a medical wing for extended examination. The doctor there looked worn before he ever laid a hand on me, like a man who had spent too long listening to stories meant to stay unspoken. He checked my vitals, shined a light into my eyes, asked about the ringing and the pressure behind my teeth. I answered honestly, and he nodded with the soft kindness of someone who wished he could lie convincingly. He told me the symptoms would fade, that rest would settle, whatever lingered from the mission, but the way he wrote notes, slow and deliberate, told me he did not believe his own reassurance. They kept us on base for 2 days. The medic walked the halls with one hand pressed to the bridge of his nose, trying to push something unseen away from his thoughts. The point man hesitated at every doorway, as though expecting the halls to shift shape beneath his feet. The young private asked me on the second night how a man should live when he cannot tell whether silence means safety or simply the beginning of something waiting to rise. I told him truthfully that you never really know. You move forward anyway and hope the past does not reach through the dark to reclaim you. On the third morning, they released us without ceremony. No debrief for our units, no explanation for what we had seen. Only a short statement that structural failure at a federal annex had required our involvement and that our silence protected national stability. They offered no gratitude, only expectation. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt sharp, almost metallic, and I found myself pausing, listening for the hum that had settled into my bones. Nothing came yet. The absence felt heavier than the sound itself. I returned to my unit 2 days later. The men there asked nothing of where I had been. Some missions invite no questions. The first nights were the worst. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for the faint push behind my teeth that came in small flashes like distant memory resurfacing through bone. During morning runs, certain streetlights flickered in ways too familiar, and once inside the chow hall, a single fluorescent bulb hummed with a pitch so close to the one in the facility that I stopped mid-step, heart pounding, until someone walked past, and the sound faded as though embarrassed to be heard. A week after our return, a small note appeared in the daily reports about a nearby town. Residents complained of headaches, strange dreams, and a low buzzing in their homes during the night. No follow-up. No classification, a single line buried beneath routine data. I folded the page and kept it, though I cannot explain why. The young private contacted me once before he transferred. He said he could not sleep well and sometimes woke to soft tapping at his window, though nothing was ever there. He asked if the signal could follow us back. I told him the truth as best I could, Places like that do not die simply because the building falls. What they create lingers in people in small, quiet ways. Months passed. The smell of strong disinfectant in certain hallways made my skin crawl. The hum of distant generators tightened my chest. I started avoiding basements because the echoes behaved wrong, too slow, too stretched. When my service ended, I moved far from Ohio to a small stretch of land where the nights were calm and the world felt steady. Yet certain habits remained. I checked lights for flicker patterns. I listened for pressure in the air. I felt the soil under my boots with deliberate attention to remind myself it was earth, not concrete, humming with unseen vibration. Some evenings a faint breeze carried a clean, sterile scent mixed with damp soil, the same combination that haunted those lowest rooms. It would drift through my window, then vanish before I could place its source. I lived on because that is what soldiers do, even when the war they fought refuses to let go. The medic wrote me once, saying the pressure behind his eyes had eased, though never entirely disappeared. The machine gunner said he dreamed of corridors shifting in length, and that he woke some nights gasping because he felt the floor moving under him. The point man avoided all underground structures, saying the air carried weight in ways he would never trust again. We all carried something from that place, something unnameable lodged deep beneath our reasoning. I learned to move forward without expecting closure. The facility had collapsed, but signals do not depend on walls. They move through air, through metal, through memory. And some nights when the world holds its breath, I still feel a faint pulse rise behind my teeth, a soft echo of the one that followed us out of the dark. I sit on my back step, watching the tree line, listening to the quiet, and reminding myself that silence does not mean peace. Silence only means the hum is waiting for a moment when the mind grows still enough for old things to climb back into awareness. We survived the mission, but none of us walked away unchanged. Some truths do not stay buried even under tons of collapsed concrete. And when I hear about strange disturbances in distant towns or see someone pause beneath a flickering light with confusion rising in their eyes, I feel a cold certainty settle in my chest that what we stopped was only the loudest part of something deeper. Still, I rise each morning. I follow routines. I let the days shape themselves instead of letting fear shape them for me. But every night before sleep, I tilt my head slightly, listening for the hum. It rarely comes, but the memory of it never leaves. And somewhere beneath the quiet of the world, something waits in the dark with patience older than any order ever given. And that is where our mission ended on paper, but not in the places that matter. Some shadows stay with you long after the boots come off, and some echoes never stop looking for a way back into the quiet. If you felt that chill in your chest, if you followed every step through those halls with us, then you already know the truth. Some doors should never be opened, and some signals should never be answered. If you want more stories that drag you straight into the dark corners the world pretends not to see, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment, tell me where you are watching from, and if you think that hum ever really died. And if you are brave enough, click the story showing on your screen right now. I will meet you on the next one, soldier.